please rise and help me to recognize the recipient of the 2022 Benedictine Leadership Institute Award, His Excellency Archbishop Charles J.
Well, can you see me? One of the difficulties I have sitting next to the president of the university is a certain height difference. Well, I don't know what to say after that video. It was really well done. I hadn't seen it before, and it brought back a lot of happy memories because it was a bit different than the ones I've seen. You know, I retired 2 years ago, and I've had a lot of people tell me how wonderful I am. And my sister always laughs, because she really knows me, you know. And I say that, it's really true. I'm not nearly as good as what Connor said, what the president said, and what everybody else has been saying about me. I know, when I die, they're going to say these things at my funeral, and I'm grateful that I heard them before I died. So thank you very, very much. But the picture is more rosy than the reality. But I'm grateful to God for a long life, serving as a bishop for many years, loving every minute of it, and meeting many, many wonderful people along the way. One of the things I want to say before I begin my talk, which is going to be about 20 minutes, I hope it's not going to be too much talking at the end of the day, is something about the feast we celebrate today. Today is a feast of Mother Catherine Drexel, a woman of Philadelphia who became the foundress of the Sisters of Blessed Sacrament and a saint. I didn't know her relationship with the college here until today. I read the piece that was sent out by your wonderful development director. It was really, really well done, so thank you very much for giving us that. But the thing I want to say about two things I want to say about Mother Catherine. The first thing is, the most important thing about Mother Catherine is her parents. They're extraordinary people. In some ways, I think they should have been the ones that were canonized. You know, her father was a very wealthy businessman in Philadelphia, a banker. Her mother died when she was 2 years old, but he married a woman who was an ancestor of Jacqueline Kennedy, which is kind of an interesting historical fact. But the thing is, it's interesting, is 3 times a week, they invited the poor to their home to give them food, clothing, and to teach their daughters the importance of being charitable. And I think Mother Catherine learned from her parents at their feet the things that led her to be a saint. Now, the reason I say this today is because most of you here are parents. And it's so important for you to know how important you are in the formation of your children, and how significant, for good or bad, your example and your words will be. God's the one who made Mother Catherine a saint, but they certainly helped God accomplish his dream with her. So be good parents and have children who are saints. Second thing about Mother Catherine I wanted to say is, when she lost her parents, she and her sisters went to Rome to get some guidance from the Pope Leo XIII, on what to do about this massive money they had. They had a huge amount of money. I think it was about $300 million in terms of today's value. And Mother Catherine had fallen in love with the Indians. She'd gone traveling with her parents out west and saw how poor the situations were with the American Indians in South Dakota and other places. And she said to the Pope that they needed missionaries. Why don't you send missionaries to the American Indians? And Pope Leo XIII said to her, why don't you become a missionary yourself? And that's the second thing I want to say to you, It's not enough for us to admire the saints. We have to become saints, right? And we have to do it ourselves. And the church that we live in today is refocusing its attention appropriately on the value of the laity. You know, you are co-responsible for the church with the clergy and religious. Co-responsible means equally responsible. That means I, as a bishop, don't have any more responsibility for the church than you do as baptized Christians. But we both have lots of responsibility for the church. And we have to do it ourselves. We can't say, well, you know, the monks at the abbey will do it, or the bishop should do this. You should do it. And it gets done. So take your responsibility upon yourself, right? And assume the responsibilities that flow from your baptism. And wonderful things will be accomplished. So I'm going to start talking now officially. That was all unofficial, okay? So here's the name of my talk. The title of my talk is 13 Years Later. And I'm going to read it because if I don't, it'll go much longer if I just start talking. So I'll try to make it interesting. I've admired Belmont Abbey College for a very long time, both for its academic excellence and for its courage. I spoke here in 2009, exactly 13 years ago, at a moment when the college faced intense bullying from the Obama administration. And what I said then applies even more forcefully tonight. So I'm going to quote myself from 13 years ago for the next paragraph. This is what I said. It's one of the great ironies of the moment that tiny Belmont Abbey College would have the courage to challenge Caesar over the right to be faithfully Catholic in policies, while so many other American Catholics seem eager to give Caesar honors. One of the deepest truths of the human predicament is this: if you stand up to evil, you may lose. But if you don't stand up, you will lose. I think we see that happening in Ukraine in a very clear and dramatic way. Belmont Abbey College, to its very great credit, has the character to stand up and defend its rights to be Catholic. So that's what I said 13 years ago, and I'd like to say it in a different way today. Caesar, you know, the symbol of government, hasn't changed, and neither has his appetite. Contempt for religious faith has been growing in America's leadership classes for many decades, as scholars like Christian Smith and Christopher Lasch have shown. But in recent years, government pressure on religious entities has hardened. It involves interfering with the conscience rights of medical providers, private employers, and individual citizens. And it includes attacks on the policies, hiring practices, and tax statuses of religious charities, hospitals, and other ministries. These attacks are real. They're happening now, and they'll get worse as America's religious character weakens. This is all happening, by the way, when our current political leaders seem to be a curious mix of arrogance and vindictiveness at home and incompetence abroad. We've turned abortion into a kind of sacred right. We've lost control of our southern border. We're obsessed with pronouns and confused sexuality. Parents are identified as domestic terrorists. Self-described Catholic public leaders act with astonishing hypocrisy. And meanwhile, Russia and China, as we've seen with brutal clarity in Ukraine and Hong Kong, and may very soon see in Taiwan, perceive us as weak, distracted, and bumbling. If I overstate these problems, it's not by much. We increasingly seem to be a hegemon in decline and other countries can sense it. So what does that all mean for us as Catholics and citizens? Our traditional political system presumes a civil society that preexists and stands outside the full control of the state. In the American model, the state is meant to be modest in scope and constrained by checks and balances. Mediating institutions like the family, churches, and fraternal organizations feed the life of the civic community. They stand between the individual and the state. And when they recede into the background, the state fills the vacuum they leave. Protecting these mediating institutions is therefore vital to our political freedom. The state rarely fears individuals because alone, individuals have little power. They can be isolated or ignored. But organized communities are a different matter. They can resist, and they can't be ignored. This is why, for example, if you want to rewrite the American story into a very different kind of social experiment, the Catholic Church is such an annoying problem. She's a very big community. She has strong beliefs, and she has an authority structure that's very hard to break, the kind that seems to survive every prejudice and persecution, even the mediocrity and worse sins of her own leaders. As Catholics, most of us have a deep love for our country, and that's wonderful. But this is not our final home. There is no automatic harmony between Christian faith and American democracy. For all its strengths, democracy has the potential for its own peculiar and very, very powerful kind of tyranny. In the words of the political philosopher Robert Cranach, democracy, quote, advances the forces of mass culture which lower the tone of society by lowering the aims of life from classical beauty, heroic virtues, and otherworldly transcendence to the pursuit of work, material consumption, and entertainment. This inevitably tends to reduce human life to a one-dimensional materialism and an animal existence that undermines human dignity and eventually leads to the abolition of man, end of quote. To put it another and simpler way, the right to pursue one's happiness does not include the right to excuse or ignore evil in ourselves or anyone else. When we divorce our politics from a grounding in virtue and truth, we transform our country from a living moral organism into a kind of golem for legal machinery without a soul. Happiness, which we all want, real happiness, is tied to wisdom, and wisdom grows out of risk and suffering, the beauty and hard edges of experiencing the real world. Happiness is never the result of commerce. We can't own happiness. We can't buy it. It's also never solitary. Happiness, true happiness, needs other people. For example, the joy of a young mother is linked to the gift of life she makes to a new and unrepeatable soul in the act of birth, to the pain and effort she experiences in bearing her child. Happiness comes from that because it's a gift to another. Happiness is either created and shared with others here and now, or remembered as moments shared with others in the past. This is why, even as he was beaten and starved in a Nazi death camp, the Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl could know happiness and the interior freedom it brings when he remembered the love of his wife. Now, I'd like to contrast happiness with comfort, which we often confuse as being the same kind of thing. Comfort is not happiness. It's a different kind of thing. It's the emollient we place between ourselves and the facts of everyday life. It's our insulation, our analgesic. The world can be nasty and unforgiving. Nobody wants to be cold in the winter when we can be warm, or hungry when we can eat steak. Comfort isn't a bad thing in its proper place, but comfort becomes happiness in only one circumstance: when we provide it to another person, when we ease someone else's suffering or burden. That's when comfort becomes happiness. America in 2022 has become a consumer culture that runs on the marketing, sale, purchase, and consumption of comfort. We like and want comfort because we're creatures with bodies that experience pleasure and pain. That's what we want, but we long for happiness. And down deep, we all know which is which and which is more important. We were made for something more than anesthetics. This is why a culture of pleasure and indulgence, a culture focused mainly on the pursuit of material well-being, is never really a culture of joy. Comfort is about the self, about making things easier or escaping inconvenience. And when it's the main dinner course of a life and a civilization, it first dulls the appetite for happiness and then replaces it altogether. My point here is simple. A consumer culture, the one in which we live, diminishes hardship, but it also lowers our horizons to the here and now. Comfort is a costly habit to feed and a demanding habit to maintain. As a great French theologian and fragrance expert, Coco Chanel, once said, "The best things in life are free, but the second best things are very, very expensive." Those of you who are younger don't know who Coco Chanel is, but those of us who are older remember her. The greater a man's need for comfort, the more he has to lose. The greater his fear of losing it, and the more firmly cemented he is to this world and its uncertainties. Thus, a culture committed to and organized around the pursuit of things that can make life comfortable can never really value nobility, honor, courage, or magnanimity, the qualities that distinguish us as humans. Because these very different things demand self-denial and risk and a belief in something or someone greater than ourselves. Comfort lived as a guiding appetite produces mediocrity. It sedates the soul. The result is a disinterest in or a resentment of any higher purpose to life as an unwanted distraction, or worse, as an intrusion. It's useful to compare this kind of spiritual enfeeblement with the current Chinese slogan, 996. Perhaps you've heard of that. Large segments of China's defense, software, and other key industries operate on the principle of 996. What that means is work begins at 9 in the morning and ends at 9 in the evening, 6 days a week. Every week. And all of it serves an explicitly higher purpose, building the power and prestige of the nation. The words weakness and decline are absent from the current Chinese vocabulary. Now, the lesson is obvious. Worship of self, comfort that I've been talking about, and worship of the state and its prestiges are both forms of idolatry. But it doesn't take a genius to know which is more compelling and more powerful, our desire for comfort. So, What do we do about our situation? The only way to create new life in any culture is to live our lives ruled by convictions greater than ourselves and shared with people we know and love. It's a path that's very simple and very hard at the same time, but it's the only way to make a revolution that matters. When young people, like the college students here, ask me how to change the world, I tell them something simple. I tell them to love each other, get married, stay faithful to one another, have lots of children, and raise those children to be men and women of Christian character. Faith is a seed. It doesn't flower overnight. It takes time and love and effort. Money is important, but it's never the most important thing. The future belongs to people with children, not to people with things. Things rust and break, but every child is a universe of possibilities that reaches into eternity, connecting our memories and our hopes in a sign of God's love across the generations. That's what matters. The soul is a child. The soul of a child is forever. If you want to see the face of Europe in 100 years, for example, look to the faces of young Muslim immigrants. Islam has a future there because Islam believes in children. Without transcendent faith that makes life worth living, there's no reason to bear children. And where there are no children, there's no imagination, no reason to sacrifice, and no future. At least 6 of Europe's most recent and prominent national leaders had no children at all. Their world will end with them. It's hard to avoid a sense that much of Europe is already dead or dying, and nothing prevents us, as America, from doing the same. The America we now see emerging, an America ignorant or cynical towards religion in general, and Christianity in particular, shouldn't really surprise anyone. It's a new America, but made in America. We Christians, including we Catholics, helped create it with our eagerness to fit in, our distractions, and our own lukewarm faith. Too many people who claim to be Christians simply don't know Jesus Christ. They don't really believe in the Gospels. They feel embarrassed by their religion and vaguely out of step with the times. They may keep their religion for comfort value, or they may adjust it to fit their doubts, but it doesn't reshape their lives because it isn't real. And because it isn't real, it has no transforming effect on their personal behavior, no social force, and few public consequences. That sort of faith, whatever it once was, is now dead. So having said all this, what can believers, and especially Catholic believers, do about it? It's always important to try to be positive. Here's a simple fact. We make history, not the other way around. We're not victims or the helpless creatures of inevitable historical forces. Nothing in this world is inevitable except the victory of Jesus Christ. And that includes what history finally says about the character of the nation we call America. During my years as a bishop, I met thousands, I should say many thousands, of young adults on fire for Jesus Christ and deeply committed to their Catholic faith. But they need encouragement, they need formation, they need education, and they need leadership. And this is why Belmont Abbey College and other institutions like it are so vitally important. If we reread the 1967 Land O'Lakes Statement on the nature of the contemporary Catholic University, we'll notice that the word faith appears nowhere in the text. Nowhere in the text. In effect, the statement is a declaration of independence from any authority outside the academic community itself. This might make some sense for secular institutions, but it's odd for any scholarly community committed to serving both faith and reason, and it creates real problems of honesty for any school wishing to cast itself as part of a living Catholic tradition. The easing away of Catholic universities and colleges from their Catholic identity can have various causes, but a common factor is the discomfort too many Catholics feel with a scholarly tradition that can be made to seem shabby and primitive in an age of scientific doubt. This is the worst kind of falsehood, the kind that steals a treasury of wisdom, imagination, and hope from an emerging Catholic leadership community. The genius of authentically Catholic higher education is the schooling it gives in the mutual dependency of faith and reason. At its best, it refuses to separate intellectual and moral formation because they are inextricably linked. It gives primacy to the disciplines that guide the formation of a holistic view of reality, philosophy and theology. It aids in the creation of a Catholic culture and explains what such a culture means for human thriving. It offers a coherent anthropology that treats the human being as a whole and actually gives meaning to the words human dignity instead of turning them into a slogan for the latest version of selfish individualism or grievance politics. It offers an immersion in the virtues and an appreciation of humanity's material and spiritual realities, the visible and invisible world, all of which get their life from belief in Jesus Christ. So Catholic higher education is heir to the greatest intellectual, moral, and cultural patrimony in human history. It has a deep, satisfying answer to who and why man is. It's beautiful because it's true. It has nothing to be embarrassed about and every reason to be on fire with confidence and apostolic zeal. We only defeat ourselves, and we certainly don't serve God, if we'll ever allow ourselves to think otherwise. St. Benedict, the patron of this institute and this college, the father of the good monks who are here, embodies the Catholic ideal of personal holiness lived in a community of virtue, and the integration of faith and life at the very highest level. If we do not know and love Jesus Christ and commit ourselves to him and act on what we claim to believe, everything else is empty. But if we do, so much else is possible, including the conversion of some of the world around us. The only question that finally matters to any of us is the one Jesus posed to his apostles. Who do you say that I am? Everything depends on the answer. Faith leads in one direction, the lack of it in quite another. But the issue is always faith, always and everywhere, whether we're scholars or doctors or priests or lawyers or mechanics. Do we really believe in Jesus Christ, or don't we? And if we do, what are we going to do about it? The vocation of a Catholic college is to feed the soul as well as the mind, to offer a vision of men and women made whole by the love of God, the knowledge of creation, and the reality of things unseen, to see the beauty in the world in the light of eternity, to recapture the nobility of the human story and the dignity of the human person. This is the work that sets fire to a young person's heart. It starts the only kind of revolution that really changes anything, a revolution of love. Jesus said, I came to cast fire upon the earth, and would that it were already kindled. My dear friends, the task we share here tonight is to help Jesus kindle that blaze, and then use all our strength, every ounce of our energy, to help that fire grow. Thank you very much.